And that was the ultimate high for me. It was the cheating. It was the chase. It was doing the act. And then it was afterwards, I would feel again that just bottomless pit of shame and regret. And I would swear to myself that I'd never do this again, like so many addicts do. I got a number of different sexually transmitted diseases. I probably gave a number of sexually transmitted diseases to different people. I was so disrespectful to these people and so dehumanizing to them. And I put them at risk. I put their health at risk as well as their emotional well-being. My biggest gratitude is the relationship that I've started to build with my children now. And it's a really beautiful thing.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Ted. Hi spiritual seekers, thanks for tuning in. Today's episode with Ted will be going out with Lisa's episode, just to shine a light on how sex addiction might affect men and women differently, bearing in mind, of course, that not everyone fits neatly into those categories. So it's not a double episode because Lisa and Ted don't know each other, but they do go in tandem. Having said that, let's get to our guest for today. So glad we were able to make it work. Ted, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Silvio. Hi, I'm Ted. I'm in London. I joined the rooms of SAA, that's Sex Addicts Anonymous, in March of 2023 after hitting a rock bottom. So coming up to about 2 years now, been working the steps, have a sponsor, also have a sponsee. But yeah, really happy to be here. Thank you.
I like to crack on with things, as you know, so let's get straight to question 1, the first of the 12 questions I ask each guest on this show. Ted, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Yes, I did. And I think my knowledge of and relationship to those has been a huge part of my recovery so far. And I think also as much as I'm capable each day, the removal of blame as a concept towards those things. So I grew up in a family of alcoholics. My mum in particular.
Right.
And she's still very much in active addiction today. Dad is a little bit harder to pin down. I'm not quite sure if he's an alcoholic or just a heavy drinker, but I'm sure he's a workaholic. I think he's probably a sex addict too.
Right.
But what's been fascinating is I've gone back. I luckily have a pretty open and honest relationship with my mum. And she's willing to talk to me about a lot of these things. Okay, that's cool. And I know from her that her mum was an alcoholic. I know from her that my grandfather, her dad was an alcoholic. I understand that my dad's dad was for sure a sex addict and I think a food addict. And I think my grandma on my dad's side, who was a wonderful woman, was also a Olympic grade avoider of all difficult. Which we've carried on that fine lineage,
right,
into our families. But so I can see that they've had their own traumas and their own burden.
How did they affect you when you were small then?
Well, I know that I had a stillborn brother when I was 2 years old-ish, almost 3, I think. And what's been interesting coming into recovery is I always used to say, oh, my mum had a stillborn baby. And it wasn't until coming into recovery that I actually acknowledged that I had a brother who died.
Yeah.
And I've had some quite momentous sort of experiences through meditation and some therapy where I've kind of remembered being back in these situations when I think he must have just died. And I think my dad went off to work to escape. And my mum was just in bed, depressed. And I think I was left for a long time over quite a long period on my own, and possibly not. I'm not sure if I was fed. I have this sort of association with a lot of hunger and that kind of stuff. But I think outside of that, it was never discussed really.
Yeah.
Wasn't really acknowledged as this, what it was as a seismic event, the death of a child. I'm a dad myself. You never get over that. And the ripple effects that has in the family, I'm the eldest, is just phenomenal. And I don't think that's ever really been acknowledged or recognised in my family. And actually, I was able to meet and experience the grief that I have about the death of my brother in recovery, which I just did not have any awareness of before. And then I think something that's, I think very likely affected my relationships and my sexuality was, I believe I was molested when I was 9 by it was a Cub Scout leader on a camping trip. And again, this came to me in recovery. I was trying to learn more about what sex addiction is, and it seems like many people come into the rooms have had some experience of some kind of sexual violation or something like that, whether it be a touch or just inappropriate language, all these kind of things, all the way through to kind of rape or whatever it might be. Many people in the room seem to be affected by that. And as I was learning about it, I kept getting this image of this guy's face would pop up in my mind's eye. And I was like, no, that's not my story. That's not my story. And then I heard this one particular story. And all of us, it was very sudden, the kind of weight of the knowledge that this thing had happened to me. And I knew the guy's name. I knew when it happened. I knew how old I was. I have a decent idea of what he did, although the memory is very fragmented. And I think I shunned that idea for a long time because I felt like I was trying to make up an excuse for why I'd done what I did. But now I'm much more at peace with that, and I recognise that it's part of my story, but it's not a way of me excusing my own.
Of course. I find it interesting, and to some degree this has happened to me as well, how when we become sober or abstinent, and in a way what we do really is we stop running away and we grow up in very broad strokes, of course, right? That things are revealed to us. My sponsor always says to me, more will be revealed to you, right? Quoting the book. And so I find it really interesting that how clear this is. And I don't mean this in any which way, in a pejorative way, but 2 years, that's a lot of stuff that you've done and uncovered and has been revealed to you in what I think is a contained amount of time. Now, I am, I'm very, what's the word I'm looking for here? Protective of my clean time. I think most addicts are in one way or another. So please don't get this the wrong way. But would you agree that that's a lot of stuff that you've come to uncover in a fairly contained amount of time, which is amazing?
I think so. I think I've been really lucky that I really had the gift of desperation because I'd really blown up my life through my actions. And I think a lot of it was already there. It was just under the surface. And I was doing, I don't know, I think I often feel like just before I hit my rock bottom, I felt like I was on a treadmill that was going a bit too fast and I couldn't get off. And if I stopped running, I would, like you see those YouTube videos or whatever, people get whisked off, fly into the gym wall.
I don't watch those, but yeah, I hear that.
I've seen them. I've heard about them. But it's that... that's my other addiction. We'll talk about that on the next one.
Sure.
I think it was just, I was quite ripe for recovery, to be honest. Because I think I've always been sort of introspective about certain topics, but I really wanted to be different, I suppose.
Yeah, exceptionalism. I hear that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I was very ready for change.
Yeah, I find it interesting because since I've come into recovery, I suppose whether my father, who's no longer with us, sadly, but, he was in a way, he was a dry drunk, even though I'm not quite sure whether he actually ever struggled with alcohol, right? And of course, you can have the spiritual malady without being an addict, we know this, but there is something about him, and this I only really uncovered once I was really in recovery, once the sort of fog had lifted, right? Whatever your personal fog might be. But, another one for me would have been the fact that I'm so clearly so very ADHD. And I sort of knew this in the back of my head, but I kind of thought it was something that was sort of confined to when I was a little kid. And all of a sudden, out am I of the drugs and the haze, and this thing's just yelling at me, So I always find it so interesting how more gets revealed to us, So
yeah, absolutely.
You had some real capital T trauma there very, very early on. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I do. I've got a younger sister and a younger brother.
Right, okay. And did you get on with them? And how did you get on at school? I'm just trying to get more of a picture of you. Because, of course, when something as traumatic as that happens and, there's issues like that, the rest of our relationship with the world can suffer pretty much immediately, or sometimes it takes some time.
I think I was a horrible bully to my little sister until she was about 14. So I think from the age of about 4 to 14, I was definitely exacting my rage against the world upon her, I think, a lot of the time. And that's, that's something I need to address more clearly with her, I think, at some point. But my little brother, he was 8 years younger, so I didn't have a huge relationship with him. I moved out when I was, I think, just turned 18, so he was only 11. Sure. So we didn't really get to know each other till a bit later on. And then, but I think, I think I've heard a lot of other addicts reflect. We sort of operated, I very much operated on my own. I didn't really have connection with my parents that much. My mum was always present physically. There'd always be food on the table. My dad worked hard and we had a roof over our heads. But I don't think there was any capacity of either of them to be emotionally available or connected to us.
Sure.
I remember my mum telling me she loved me once. I remember I was 8 and she thought I was asleep. And apart from that, she never told me. And I still struggle to get it out of her today, even though I sort of tell her I love her.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because, either which way you look at this is not what makes us addicts. I mean, obviously we know this, right? But my mum showered me with love, was all over me, and I had to sort of almost surgically remove her, and I have to do this fairly frequently still, because otherwise, she's just so attached, and that didn't really do me a lot of good either. So I suppose from any mother's point of view, whether you do one or the other doesn't really matter so much, but it is really interesting. And thank you for sharing that. Now, our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked / the fun times, what did that look like? Now, as always, big caveat around this, not everyone has fun times, and this is sort of with those people in mind who have a party phase, and obviously, with drinking and using, which you may well have had, but in terms of the behavior that started becoming problematic at some point, it must have started somewhere. How did it start, and what did it do for you?
Well, I think I discovered masturbation, I think, at age 11. I remember, and I think this is why I think probably the molestation fed into this, because I remember immediately feeling ashamed of what I was doing and feeling ashamed of my sexuality, and in some way that I was unclean or dirty and what I was doing was wrong.
Yeah.
In the house I grew up in, sexuality was never discussed. My dad never talked to me about women or sex or anything like that. Because I think it was a sort of unsaid, shameful subject, perhaps. And but I think I immediately recognised the power of it, and I was hooked immediately on that. And from that moment, I would compulsively masturbate. And as I got older, it'd be multiple times a day, in inappropriate places. As a teenager, that kind of stuff. Because I think I associated danger and shame with getting off. And that was the kind of ultimate high. And I think, but I remember really distinctly going over to a friend's house and watching porn for the first time when I'll show you my age, but it was VHS.
Yes, I remember.
And it was basically illegal in this country to get hardcore porn, I think. So his dad would get stuff from Amsterdam, I think, and watching this video, and everyone else was laughing at it because it was ridiculous and really cheesy. I was so activated, and I had to just pretend I needed to go to the toilet, and then I went and masturbated. And then I think, the very, very distinct memory, I was at his house playing Sega Mega Drive till 11:30 or something at night, and his mum and dad had gone to bed, and I said, all right, I'm going home now. And I snuck into his mum and dad's bedroom because I knew where the drawer was, where the videos were. And I stole a video, and his mum woke up whilst I was stealing it, and she thought I was him. So I ran out of the house, I ran home, and then immediately watched this thing. I was full of regret and shame, and then threw the VHS in a hedge around the back of the house. But I think that's an insane thing to do.
Yeah.
And I had no control over doing it, and I think I was probably 14 at that point.
Apart from the fact that you thought, oh wow, I've discovered this totally amazing thing, and if I do it here or there, then it's even more amazing, right? So to a degree, of course, 13, 14-year-old boys, don't really know what to do with themselves anyway around this time. So, some of it, and some of it is normal, I suppose, The fact that you immediately felt shame, I think, is really, really interesting. And I'm just wondering whether you had any sense of why you'd be ashamed or why this would be a problem in one way or another.
It was like a creepy thing that creepy men did.
Right.
I think because I innately understood I couldn't control it. It felt this dangerous thing. And then I think once I moved out and I grew up and I started, women started to be attracted to me. Sometimes, that then was the next massive hit. And I remember having sleeping with someone. But I think it was the way I lost my virginity was also again just reinforced this association with a complete lack of intimacy and sex. Because I lost my virginity to a friend who just said they would help me lose my virginity. I wasn't in a relationship with this person. And it was very awkward, and I felt ashamed, and I couldn't get an erection, and it got very embarrassing, and I felt a lot of shame and inadequacy about that. And I think this all fed into then me becoming extremely promiscuous when I sort of got into my 20s. And when you talk about the good times, that was absolutely that point.
Right, let's go there.
So I was sleeping with lots and lots of women. I DJ'd at the time, so I think that helped.
Yep.
And I was going out probably 5 or 6 days a week. I was a student. And because I DJ'd, I knew all the people in the bars, so I get free booze. I've also been abstinent of alcohol for almost 2 years now as well.
So there was an intersection there for you.
Yeah, and that would always go hand in hand. I'd never sleep with someone unless I was drunk, basically. But I would have lots of one-night stands. I got a number of different sexually transmitted diseases. I probably gave a number of sexually transmitted diseases to different people. But I think what really started to transpire then, and actually something that happened with my very first girlfriend, was I would always cheat. And that was the ultimate high for me. It was the cheating. It was the chase. It was doing the act. And then it was afterwards, I would feel again that just bottomless pit of shame and regret. And I would swear to myself that I'll never do this again. Like so many addicts do. And then, hey presto, a couple of months later, I was doing the same thing again.
And so the cycle was born.
Yeah. And I would, there was some partners I had that I think I slept with maybe 8 or 12 other people. I was so disrespectful to these people and so dehumanizing to them. And I put them at risk, I put their health at risk as well as their emotional well-being.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this thing followed me, and I got into all these really dysfunctional relationships. Very codependent, I think. What do
you mean by that when you say that? Just so that it's a word that gets used so much that I'm starting to lose track what that really means sometimes. So how do you mean that?
I think and that's something I've sort of been learning more about of late. But it would either be I would be very dependent on them being. I would be my emotional state would be completely dependent on their emotional state. So if they were happy, I was happy. If they were sad, I was sad. Sure. If they were angry, I was very scared. So I was always, there was always the two faces. There would be the me that presents to the world, and there would me, the people pleaser that would tell everybody what they wanted to hear, and then there was me that actually had the needs and the wants that I couldn't express, because they were too controversial, or I was worried that someone would leave me if I ever expressed them.
Yeah.
Which then would get me into these positions, I think, where I was unhappy in some respect, and then would do something devastating and extremely aggressive by cheating, I think.
Did you, while you were going through this, so you're in your early 20s here, so some sort of awareness might creep in that actually this is not just a bit of harmless fun, and that this is really becoming something that is creating consequences and pain for myself and for others. Did you justify that to yourself in some way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, as a young man in this culture, I was absolutely encouraged, and I wasn't the only one doing it, I was in a very sort of hedonistic crew of people. There was a lot of kind of, people sleeping with each other. But I always still had that shame, and I still had that. And even when I had a one night stand, I would feel very sort of, when I first did it, I had this massive high. And I remember going into work the next day. I worked in a little shop. It was my weekend job. And I went into the shop and I was just absolutely elated for about 48 hours after sleeping with this person. But as I progressed, I would become more and more depressed. And I remember, for example, in one of my one of the experiences I drew out for my step one was I was dating someone. I told them that I wanted to be monogamous, and then they went away for a weekend. So then I promptly slept with someone, then got up in the morning, went to the pub at about 10 a.m. because there was a pub that was open at that time where my friend worked. Proceeded to get very inebriated, and then went home with another woman who was much older than me. And I just remember acting very inappropriately with her in a public space, and I remember leaving that situation feeling so demoralized and broken.
Yeah.
All unprotected, and and then having to kind of fess up, as it were, to this person that I was dating. And I would sort of get in these cyclical relationships where I'd sort of become, partnered with someone, although not really be dating. We'd just be quote unquote seeing each other. My head, I was desperate to just have a relationship with someone and be happy. And then I'd end up compulsively cheating on them with somebody else who I'd then get into a relationship with. And there was always this overlap.
It's massively confusing.
Really messy. Just completely absent of any intimacy, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I was using people like someone would use a drink.
Yeah. Now, a bit off script here, and I just need to clear this thought in my head. I just can't help it, I have to ask. And feel free to tell me to go away, right? But I mean, you're a good-looking guy and everything. Obviously, the thing with podcasts is we can't see each other. You, the listener, sorry, can't see you. I can see you, and of course we keep to tradition 11 here. But nonetheless, you're a good-looking guy and all, but that's a lot of turnover, if I may put this bluntly, right?
Mm-hmm.
One, is there an underground network of people that you were able to tap into or something?
Mm-hmm.
And two, at what point did you think this is just really getting too much, which is going to lead us into our following question then?
Yeah. I think as an addict, I had a great ability to sniff out vulnerable people.
Right.
If I saw a woman that seemed a bit crazy, I'd be completely enamored with them.
Mm.
Probably because I was as crazy as they were, if not crazier. Mm. So yeah, I had a real good nose for women would be vulnerable, I think.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It doesn't make it better, does it? I mean, emotionally speaking, if the person that you are then, quote unquote, using, if you don't mind me using that word, is also actually just really, really vulnerable. So it is an underground network of vulnerable people in that way. I suppose.
I'm sure I slept with a lot of female sex addicts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I suppose it's the equivalent of me, in my early 20s when I went out and I've said this on here before, I could sort of drop me into any club anywhere in the world, and I would within minutes, or, if it was half an hour, it'd be a really bad day, I'd have found the guy and, to score what I wanted and not just any old stuff and all the rest of it. I prided myself, as a badge of honor, of course, so I suppose it's not dissimilar. Maybe there's some sort of crossover there.
Because I've never had a dealer's number. Like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah. I always thought of it, I still do in a way, is that my addiction secures, like a military planner secures the supply lines. That's the way I looked at it. Now, question 3, and we were leading up to that, weren't we? Is that question three is, what were your worst consequences, and finally your rock bottom? So, the progression really, this is already quite something. You don't really seem to have a lot of awareness that you might be a sex addict. At least it doesn't sound like it. You're not enamored with the way you are behaving, no pun intended.
Mm-hmm.
But still, you don't seem to be able to stop either. Right? How did it progress?
So I was really very depressed, I think. Yeah. And I was in this cycle, and I was away on holiday, and I met my now ex-wife when I was away, and we fell in love in 3 days. And of course, I was seeing someone else at the time. I was sleeping with them, and then I slept with my ex-partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I then did a geographical and moved halfway across the world to live with her.
Yeah.
And I thought that would fix me. I thought, I've really found love this time. And I do still believe that. But I was also a very unwell person. And I didn't really know what to do with that love, I think.
Yeah.
And I did stop cheating for a while. I did actually cheat on her when we had first got together, and I was still living in London and she was abroad. Again, completely compulsive. It was with someone I didn't find attractive. And it was, surprise, surprise, it was when my ex-partner had come to visit me in London. She had then left. 2 days later, I went out. I drank a ton of booze. I did some ecstasy. What was interesting about that moment was this woman asked me, I seeded the conversation with, that I was in North London. I didn't want to go back to where I lived in South London. It was, it was a real schlep to get back there. So I kind of said this in conversation to this person. She was like, "Oh, well, you can stay at mine if you like." And I heard for the first time in my life, I heard a voice in my head that said, destroy, which meant destroy the thing you've got going on with this person that you're in love with.
Yeah.
And I followed that voice.
And it came as a word.
And it came as a word. It was interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Because I think a lot of people in the rooms that I attend have huge, it's probably universal for addicts. I don't know, sweeping statement, but huge intimacy issues. So the closer I got to someone, the more likely it was I was going to compulsively act out to destroy it, because I couldn't bear to be that vulnerable, I think, with someone, truly.
Yeah.
But we got through that. We worked through it, and I moved abroad, and we started living a life together, and a lot of it was really exciting and really nice. But my porn use continued. I would watch porn 2 or 3 times a day, always in secret, unbeknownst to my ex-partner. And, slowly the old behaviours, the old temptations started to kick in. And what I started to develop was a habit of, and this is something I'd done universally since I'd been with my first ever girlfriend, was I would fantasize about their friends. And I now, on reflection, think that was because they're the most dangerous people to fantasize about. I didn't fantasize. I never had an issue with sex workers, for example. I wouldn't fantasize about random people that I'd seen. It would always be someone that I was in proximity with, and very often, or almost always, would be the friends or the best friends of my partners at the time. And I began doing that again, and it kind of crept in, and then I justify it to myself, I'm a red-blooded male. I have urges. This is actually the safest way to deal with them.
Can I just pause you for just 1 second? Because there's one question that's listening to all of this. I'm just wondering, your relationship with your ex-partner, were you able, in this time where you were, a bit better than you were before, right? And you were truly in love, and there was something real going on there, some real intimacy that was required. Were you able to be emotionally intimate with that person, with your ex-partner? If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Sometimes, but I had huge issues with that. And it's so sad now in reflection, but she was so kind to me so much at the time.
Yeah.
And I would reject it all the time. We went out to see a sports game, and she put it was my birthday, and she put my happy birthday turned up on the board of the thing. I got so angry with her for doing it.
That's tough, man.
And called her a bitch. And I think about that with real sadness now.
Yeah. Were you able to make love to her rather than have sex?
Yes, but I think often it was actually tinged with I think kind of fear, or wasn't really shame. It was kind of awkwardness, I think, because again, I found it very difficult to be intimate in that way.
Yeah.
If I was high or drunk, it wouldn't be an issue. But there were periods where I would find it really difficult for us to have sex with one another, emotionally more so. And I would have to kind of disassociate almost. Again, that was very, it's very sad on reflection. That was okay.
Obviously, your relationship was suffering from all of this, and must have sort of creaked under the strain of it, I suppose, in one way or another. How did it then progress? I mean, you say she's your ex-partner, so there is that, and somehow that must have come to an end, and that probably precipitated also your progression. So how did that come about? How did that manifest?
So we moved to the UK, and we had our first child, and that very often put a lot of strain under couples, and it certainly did us. And I know certainly I wasn't able to. I didn't really have the wherewithal to cope with the the pressure, I don't think.
Yeah.
So I did lean into my addiction even more so, and I think my porn use probably increased even more. And again, the fantasy was there very much so. But what happened over the course of the next 5 years was, it was when my ex-partner was actually pregnant with our second child. And I think perhaps on reflection, I felt a particular amount of anxiety around those times when she was pregnant because of the death of my brother. But I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I know that my alcohol intake went up a lot, and I think my porn use also increased at these times. But in that period when she was pregnant, I went out for a friend's birthday. I got very inebriated again, and I ended up acting out with an ex acting out partner, and that was the first time I had physically cheated with another person whilst being with my ex-partner, post me obviously cheating earlier on in our relationship. And again, this is not someone that I was physically attracted to. It was really just the opportunity had become available, and surprise, surprise, I took advantage of that. And I remember the next day feeling completely shattered by it, and so again ashamed. I took our eldest out for a walk in the buggy. I was immensely hungover. My ex was very upset with me because I got home at 4 a.m, stinking of booze. And I obviously knew what I had done. But I think it switched something in my head. I was like, okay, that's the thing I can do now, in some deep recess. And then about 1.5 years after that, I tore the whole thing down by having an emotional and partly physical affair with my best friend's wife, who was also, as a couple, they were our very close friends. So, for my ex, I just completely exploded her world. She was in a foreign country. We have 2 young children. She doesn't have a huge friendship network because she's obviously, an ex living here. I then removed from her the 2 people that we were probably closest with, destroy all trust between us and trust between her and this other woman. And I obviously destroy my relationship with my very close friend who I've known for 20 years, and do serious damage to his mental health and his marriage. And I use his wife, who was also my friend, as an escape. I used her as a drug.
Yeah.
I really care about her. I used her because I wanted validation and I wanted satisfaction. And I wanted to feed my addiction. And my rock bottom was receiving a message from her saying that she had told her husband, my friend, and at the same time, simultaneously, my eldest child coming up to tell me something really sweet about what he'd have for breakfast. And I think the image of, my beautiful child sharing some beautiful information, in this completely innocent way, and the image of this message where I knew everything was falling apart was what completely broke me. And that was when I disclosed to my ex. And of course, everything then blew up. So I walked away from my job because of just being completely overwhelmed. My ex then left me. Of course, my friend was extremely angry with me, and rightfully, was completely heartbroken. Friendship group was obviously destroyed in a much broader sense as well. So all of that, everything just fell down. It felt like at that point,
right?
And my ex took the kids abroad again. My ex took our kids abroad to be with her family for a time. We were renovating our flat So I was it was very symbolic. I was living in the ruins of this place.
Yeah.
Missing and stuff.
It's very poignant. Mm-hmm. And it's always good to see when people can laugh about their rock bottoms. But at the time, it feels like the end of the world, does it not? Yeah. And our question 4, hot on the heels of that, is at your worst, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide?
Yes, I did a couple of times. And it was actually in early recovery, funnily enough. But I remember one time in the car with my child, and this very early on, and a mutual friend of mine and my ex-best friend text me about something we had been discussing, and from the way he'd written the message, he clearly hadn't heard what had happened. Right. And and for whatever reason, I'm not exactly sure, but it triggered this huge wave of panic and despair, I think. And I just remember driving the car back sobbing and looking at my youngest child who was asleep, and kids looked like little angels when they're asleep, and I was just like, you don't need me here. Yeah. I'm more trouble than I'm worth, I didn't ideate how I would do it. I just had this sense that I need to be gone for everybody else.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, there was a second time when I actually thought about how I would do it, which was actually when I was spending some time with my sister, and I think a lot of that was the sort of despair and exhaustion of everything and guilt and shame.
It's important to talk about it, particularly, I think, for sex addicts and food addicts and all those who don't ingest a substance that can actually kill you, right? Who don't sort of ingest poison, which is what we do with cocaine or heroin or, all sorts of other stuff, alcohol, of course, And the reason why I say this, it may sound obvious to us now, right? But I don't think it's all that obvious to the outside world that if you have a behavioral addiction, sex, food, gambling, it can also kill you because of that, because it can take you to a place where you feel that the little innocent child that is yours, doesn't really need you. It'd probably be better off without you. It's very sad, but it's really important to point this out, I think, because all those other addictions, they're also deadly. Very much so.
Absolutely.
Our question 5. What other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
Not many. I think I was in complete denial that there was a problem. And I thought ultimately my addiction was my friend, I think. I tried to cut out, when I was a lot younger and I discovered masturbation, I would try not to masturbate. I'd maybe last a day, and then I would, with all the attendant shame and all of that kind of stuff. But I think when I was old, I would try not to put myself in situations where there might be someone that I think I could use. But beyond that, there was nothing really concrete.
Yeah. Thank you. Question 6. Once you then came into the rooms, did you struggle with the word God?
I think I was so desperate, I don't think I did. And because I didn't grow up in a religious family, but I had I think a spiritual, perhaps, understanding of the world through my grandmother, who was religious. And I remember believing in God as a child. I think my idea of what God is now is different, but I think I quite quickly came to I was desperate enough that I wanted to connect with some
God, God, gift of desperation, really.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was very lucky in that respect, I think.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. Thank you. It's one of the many reasons why I started this podcast is because of my incredible struggle with it at the time, and all the agnosticism I had to sort of put aside, and so on and so forth. So I'm always a little bit astounded almost when people go, no, actually, no, I didn't really struggle with it. I'm like, wow, look at that.
I didn't have a huge amount of baggage, so I didn't have to get rid of that baggage before.
Amazing, thank you. You were alluding to it just now a little bit, so let's go into it. Our question 7, how do you experience your higher power today? It's also a good place to share some God moments if you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the best summation of it was actually when I was doing my step 6 and 7. And
aptly enough.
Exactly, yeah. But I'd had this really wonderful experience actually after step 5. I hadn't immediately, but I'd gone home afterwards. I was exhausted. I sort of had this very visceral sort of lucid dream. I wouldn't say it was a vision because I definitely nodded off, but I had this very sort of vivid dream of kind of releasing all these resentments, but I knew the next day that I still had resentments against my higher power, because I was like, I still just had this feeling of like, where were you when I needed you? You know, I was so isolated and miserable when I was a child. You know, why weren't you there for me? And why weren't you there for me when I was in my 20s? And I was like, I knew that I was desperately searching for love, and I was, you know, doing it in the worst way, you know. Yeah. Totally counterproductive way. I wanted love, but I was acting in a way that made people not love me. You know? And it sounds sort of silly, but I was sitting on the end of the bed, and my dog came and jumped on the bed, and she does this thing where she sits next to you and then leans into you. And I was like, no, you know, where was the love for me kind of thing? And I was like, oh, there it is. And I was like, oh, okay. So higher power was always, it was the love. You know, as a human being, I believe that you need love to live. And for me, that's kind of where my higher power showed up for me. My higher power gave me all the right ideas about what I needed. It's just I went looking in all the wrong places. And I think that I was like, okay, so you've always been there. You're within me. You know, it's not, I think earlier on in recovery, I thought, okay, my God gives me things, like it gave me children, you know, amazing blessings. It gave me a relationship with my ex. And it gave me my friends and all the blessings I have in my life. But I think actually the way I feel now is it's much more, it is those things. You know, it is the love. My higher power is the like unconditional love I feel for my children, for example. All the love I feel for my parents, you know, it is that. Or it's feeling amazing when I listen to a piece of music that I love. That is my higher power. Yeah. So it's not necessarily like a sort of other thing. It's just within me, and it's all around me, and it's kind of all the things that make me feel joy and connectedness. That is my higher power in a way.
Yeah, that's really, really lovely. Thank you so much. In a way, it's an anagram thing, isn't it, between the dog and the God, and so on. I could really relate to what you said about, you know, the warmth. When I meditate, my dog often curls up right next to me, and you know, and just ever so gently leans into me, and just another breathing creature, also a creature of God, breathing with me. And just being there for me, the warmth and so on, it can connect you so quickly to a power that is clearly greater than myself.
That's beautiful. I always remember driving on the road, and there was a sort of median in the middle, and all the grass was, you know, hadn't been cut. I think in the old days I'd be like, oh, it's so messy. When I looked at it, I was like, wow, life is just bursting out. Yeah, you know, us humans whack tarmac down. Yeah, and kind of stitch everything, but no, it's like there's so much life force everywhere. You know? Yeah. Bursting forth.
Amazing, absolutely irrepressible, I suppose is the word, you know. Wonderful, Thank you. Our question 8. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you? You already spoke about your step 4 and 5 there, which is always, well, not always, but it can be a point of, of the first light coming in quite often. Right. Certainly for me, it was, you know, the first time where my obsession to drink and use was lifted from me, and I didn't feel like it was a struggle at all times. But of course, some of the steps do create, we balk at them, really, is what we do, don't we, as the book says. So which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
I think predictably 4 was difficult. It was grueling. It took me ages. I think it took me about 9 months in the end.
Wow.
Which I think it's partly because, I've got 2 young children and I have quite a busy job. So finding the time to do it was also a bit difficult, but absolutely I avoided it. Hold my hands up to that. But I think that was good because by the time I got to step 5, I was like, I really want to get rid of all this crap, because I could really see it. I had this image in my mind of this like basement full of crap. I wanted to shove it all in a skip, I was like, I am done, because it gets so boring as well. Like all the stuff was the same.
It's repetitive.
It was all envy, it was all pride, intolerance, all of it. I was like, God, this is so boring. So by the time I got to step 5, I was really keen to get, really whack through it. And then I think, but step 8, and no, honestly, no pun intended, but I found step 8 to be very sobering. Because just the realization that all the things that I put in my fears about being abandoned and unloved and betrayed, it was all the stuff I was doing to other people. And so much of my step 8 was about dehumanizing other people and not treating them with the respect that they deserve as, children of God. And like beautiful creations. We're all beautiful creations of God. And also to myself, I completely abandoned myself. I had no respect for myself. I think that's what so much of addiction is about for me, is a complete disregard and actually kind of hatred of oneself, because you just treat yourself like crap. You wouldn't treat, I did treat a lot of people like that, but just the pain I'd caused to all the people that were so good for me, was really heartbreaking and as I say, sobering, but also just an incredible realization. So powerful.
Yeah, very powerful. Just listening to this, and this is something that I've discussed with other people, not on the pod, but in general, and it's something that I hope it's not going to get me into trouble, but do you think that a step 8 and step 9 for someone like a sex addict who does harm to others, we all do harm to others, but does harm to others, or who needs someone else, right, in order to fulfill their addiction? So in other words, when I needed a drink and a line, right, which in theory, of course, in that moment, might not immediately hurt someone, right? But only by, I'm lying to my wife and I'm saying that I've not been using what I've been using, and all sorts of other things, right? All sorts of other implications. But it's not quite as direct, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. As it would be perhaps for a sex addict who literally needs another person in order to get that high, and thus creates harm. Do you think that there's a fundamental difference there?
I don't know if it's a fundamental difference. I think the mechanism's the same, but I think the damage is greater and more obvious.
Yeah.
Because like you say, even if it's not me, sleeping with someone or cheating on someone, it's me watching pornography, where I'm sure many people who operate in that business are damaged people, potentially.
Yeah, the same goes, of course, for I'm a cocaine addict, so, there's no point in pretending that that just kind of grew on a tree and no one was hurt in the making. So there is that, of course, and that has to be factored in. It's very thin ice, but I still wanted to just have a musing here very quickly off script as to whether there might be a difference there. In the end, I don't think there is, certainly not a fundamental one. We do, in the end, what do? We lie and we cheat, and I had a double life where I wasn't cheating on my wife with another person, but I was cheating on my wife with a substance, really. So, yeah.
And I think that, my addiction was about I couldn't see people as humans, because if I did, I wouldn't be able to do what I was doing.
No, of course not.
But I think it's more overt, because I'm dehumanizing another person in But it's the same with people who are addicted to sex workers, for example.
Sure.
You're paying them, it's a trade, but ultimately you're using that person, paying them as a being.
Again, I don't want to take any position on this. I just thought it was an interesting tangent. Back to our questions, though, and that is why it's good to have them so that we don't go off on run away with the whole thing. Our question 9: which character defects give you most trouble?
Pride, massive.
Yeah.
Got a very delicate ego. I think the kind of counterpoint to that is jealousy and envy. Lust is difficult, of course.
Yeah.
But I think actually it's probably more pride, perhaps, and envy that underlies a lot of the lust.
Right.
And then, of course, self-centeredness for me is the thing that it always comes back to. It ultimately boils down to that because it's seeing me as the center of the universe. Again, it's dehumanizing other people. And it's one of those paradoxes, right, of recovery where I think I'm the most important thing in the world and everybody's thinking about me. I still think I'm a piece of shit and worthless.
Yeah.
But I think there's self-centeredness is also just trying not to understand the world as it relates to me and understand that I'm just a part of the world.
Yeah. It's a behavior I fall into, of course, where in the end, all of a sudden, the sun starts orbiting the earth and not the other way around, and all of a sudden I'm back in the middle of things, and then that's a surefire way to get very, very unhappy very, very quickly, and step 10's to follow. Speaking of 10, question 10, what is the best thing recovery has given you?
I think it's given me a sense of self because I never knew who I was, and then it's given me a compassion and love for myself, which isn't always there. And what that's allowed me to do is really open up and be vulnerable with other people. And I think probably my biggest gratitude in relation to that is the relationship that I've started to build with my children.
Yeah.
Because they didn't really like me before, because I don't think I was a very nice person to be around. And my relationship is radically different with them now. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I think that gives me hope that I can help them make their way through life perhaps a little bit better than the previous generations and the generations before that. And if they get into trouble, if they find themselves addicted to something, they know they can speak to me, or they know that there's paths out of that darkness.
Yeah. Did you think of this when you were just saying that? Did you think of this in the context of sort of transgenerational trauma? Is that what you're alluding to there?
Yeah, I think so. Because I can see how that trauma and addiction cycles knocks down the generations, and it doesn't excuse what we've all done, but I think it gives me hope that my kids at least can grow up in an environment that is more compassionate and loving towards them, and it gives them the tools to maybe operate in life a different way. And even if they do become addicts in one way or another, they have knowledge of a way of getting out of that, that place.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we're differently equipped now to deal with that.
And I'd say also again, in relationships, I think my relationships with my ex is in some ways probably better than it's ever been. There's still a lot of hurt and harm there that I need to carry on making a living amends, but I can be a lot better person to her now than I ever could before.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
I know when newcomers come into my fellowship, I've quite often said you don't have to keep it a secret anymore. And I think if anyone's out there wondering if they're an addict, I'd just say, jump on a Zoom or get down to a meeting and just hear other people's stories. Because I know when in our group, we read out what we call the problem. And it's sort of summation of lots of people's behaviours and issues. And I burst into tears when I heard that, because I was like, oh, it's not just me. And I think it's just understanding that it's not just you, and there is a light, that you can walk towards.
Yeah, there is a light, indeed, there is. Do you think that people might find it more difficult to come to the rooms because there's generally a little bit of shame around sex, or often there is a bit of shame around sex as a societal setup rather than anything else, and it's a little bit more, perhaps it's a little bit easier to come in and say, look, I really struggle with drinking, right? Rather than saying, no, I really struggle with masturbating 6 times a day, and I've lost a job because, I can't attend any Zoom meeting and people think I'm a creep type thing.
Yeah, I think it's probably twofold. I think as a fellowship, SAA is a lot younger than AA, for example, or even NA.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot less knowledge generally about sex addiction and love addiction too. But I think that's also compounded by the fact that, as we were saying before, the addiction does embroil other people so much more and does so much more direct harm to people. I think that it is very much clouded in shame. And we live in a very sexualized society where being promiscuous or being very open about sex is also celebrated. And that's not, I don't make a judgment about that, but I think it can muddy the waters, and I think because with behavioral addictions, it's not like, okay, I'm not going to pick up a drink anymore. I've been blessed that I found not drinking again to be relatively easy. I don't think it was my primary addiction.
It's hard not to stifle a laugh there for me. Yeah.
It's a clear thing. I either pick up a drink or I don't.
Yeah.
Whereas,
of course,
if I objectify someone on the road, or I get into fantasy all of a sudden, it's not, so that's why it's a much more kind of mercurial thing to try and pin down. And, but I think it's difficult.
Of course, let's not kid ourselves. We live in a hugely alkalized society.
Absolutely.
We also live in a society in London in particular. For instance, you say that you were from London. I'm in London. The city with the biggest cocaine consumption in the whole of Europe. If I remember it well, I saw something the other day. It was 23 kilos a day get consumed, and it's insane amounts of cocaine. You can get it everywhere. So I suppose it doesn't really make that much difference. There is enough backdrop there if you wanted it, so to speak. And of course, as cocaine addicts and alcoholics, we are not free. On the contrary, of any sexual sins, and misbehaving in that respect either. So the overlap is huge. I think more unites us, than divides us. I think that's the way I would put it in the end. Yeah, absolutely. And our last question of the 12 questions: what do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
I've thought about this one before, because I've listened to your podcast. I think probably just good effort. You screwed it up at the beginning, but you've been trying your best since.
Yeah, you've come round.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know if I'm still, if I live another 20, 30 years, whether I'll still be in that place. But I do, I feel very blessed that I live a real life now.
Yeah.
And I hope that that's reflected in the way that I conduct myself. And I hope that that's something that my HP would agree with.
Amazing. Ted, it's taken us, I don't know, maybe 2 months or so to set this up, for different reasons and scheduling and all the rest of it. It's so worth the wait. Thank you so much for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions. You're just so engaging and open with your addiction and your recovery, which I thought was really amazing and really helpful. So thanks for being my guest today.
Thanks so much, Silvio. I really enjoyed it.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.